And in this video, we're going to be reassembling the bottom end of our KZ400. We've taken it apart, we've cleaned it, we've gotten all the parts that need to be there cleaned up, fixed, anything it needed. I got all the gaskets scraped off of it and all the old goo, 50-year-old sealant in there. All the stuff is gone. So the cases are nice and clean. Time to put this engine together. So before we put this engine together, let's discuss how a constant mesh transmission works. So the way the shift forks work is there's a drum, and the drum has got cam grooves in it to guide along these shift forks. And what happens is there is a shifting mechanism which turns this drum, and it's just basically a fork that just pushes against some pins in the side. But to make your transmission work, it needs to move these shift forks back and forth, in and out, to engage and disengage a particular gear. So, with that being said, what has to happen here is we're going to put our transmission partially together, and we'll explain how each and every gear works as we go through. So the first thing that has to happen on these transmissions is there's a locator for the bearings, and there's a groove in the bearing that allows the locator to, the locator just rests inside of that. So in this particular instance, this is our counter shaft. This is the shaft that goes to the chain. The sprocket sits here, and with that, the chain then runs around that sprocket. Okay? This is the driven shaft. The driven shaft, and we're fitting these into the shift forks, and I'll explain those as we go along. But this gets driven by the engine itself. It goes, the clutch goes, in this particular case, is the chain going to the clutch pack, and the engine itself turns the outer hub, and then the inner hub, which is grabbed on by the clutch plates themselves, transfer power in through here and out to here. But right now we're in neutral because both of these shafts can spin freely. So the way the transmission works is we need to be able to lock certain gears onto the shaft so that they engage into their perspective gear ratios. So what happens here is certain gears are splined onto the shaft. All the gears with the shift forks attached to them are splined onto the shaft. So they engage gears that are not locked onto the shaft. If we look here, we can see I'm holding this shaft here, and I can spin this gear, and I can spin this gear. This guy is locked onto the shaft, this guy is locked onto the shaft. So now, if this guy is locked on the shaft, this one cannot be. So you can see I can spin him by holding that shaft, and I can spin this one by holding the shaft, and I can spin this one. So what ends up having to do for us to transfer power, what we need to do is be able to say first gear needs to go through here so it can transfer power out. And the only way we can do that is to lock this guy onto the shaft. This guy's locked onto the shaft, his counterpart is not. So what we can do is we can slide this in one to here via the dogs on the side. This will slide in and engage with this and lock it onto the shaft. So it's a fairly straightforward operation. The shift fork, which is on a cam, will move this gear into here to get us first gear. So to do that, we will go on ahead and we're going to turn the transmission, the shift drum. We'll turn it so that it moves this gear, and this goes into first, and you can see it slide over. So this gear, which is locked onto the shaft has now engaged this gear, which now locks it onto the shaft, and we have power through first gear. So it goes here through this gear, and that shaft is now, this gear is now locked onto the shaft, and it can transmit power. So then to come back out, we go back into neutral before we do anything, because we have a constant mesh transmission. It's always constantly meshing. If it's always constantly meshing, we need to be sequential, and it's a sequential, which means you go through first, it's got to come out of first and into second. You can't just select a gear because the drum rotates. So we're going to go into second. Now second gear is the second largest on this shaft here, so that would be this guy. This one is locked onto the shaft. This one is not. As you can see, it can turn. And what we need to do is move this gear, which is locked onto the shaft, into here so it will lock in. So to do that, we just go turn the shift drum, and now you see the gear move over and it engages this. So now we have power going through here onto this lock gear. This gear is now locked onto the shaft, and we have second gear powering out. Okay, our next gear is third gear. So what's going to happen here is this gear here is going to have to come out of second first, and then it's got to engage into this gear. And to do that, it just does, and it just moves right on through. Let me get it to turn there, and you see it came in and engaged this gear. So now we have power going from here through this gear and out. Okay, so now for it to go into fourth gear, which is this guy here, this needs to come out of third, and then this guy has to come over and engage into this one, and you'll see him do that. So now he's engaged. So now we have power going through here, and out. We have our fourth gear. For it to come into fifth gear, which is the biggest gear on this guy, which it would be here, and so what's going to happen is this gear is going to come out of fourth, and he's going to continue on. Now he's completely out of fourth, so we're kind of in a neutral, to be honest. And then it comes out and goes into fifth. So it locked into fifth, so now we have power going through here and out. Every single time that we change gears, we go through a neutral. You always do, because you can never have two gears engaged at the same time. So that's why sometimes what you hit is a false neutral, and it's because the shift drum didn't turn all the way. So this is like between fourth and fifth, and we're in neutral. So there's a neutral between every real gear. So then coming back out, we need to gear in, and we'll just continue on. So and it comes back out, goes into another neutral. Now it goes back and engages this guy, comes back out, engages this guy, which is our second gear. Then it goes into there's a detent where there's a neutral, and then next one would be this guy gets engaged into here. And that is how the transmission does its dance to distribute power from this shaft through the gears and out. It just does nothing more than engages two gears to a particular shaft. Again, certain gears are always engaged, certain gears are not. And so you get them to engage and it moves on through. So that's how the transmission works. So it is now time for some engine assembly. So what we need to do here is we need to make sure there's some lubrication on the crank, because we have been cleaning it and cleaning it and cleaning it, and all that lubrication is gone, so we want to make sure that we deal with that properly. Then we need to make sure that all our surfaces are clean, which we've done. I've cleaned every surface on everything with acetone. So we are now ready to start putting things together. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take an oil can, just your basic pump oil can, and I'm finding the oil hole for the whole oiling system. So all I'm going to do here is I'm going to take my oiler and squirt some oil into that. And what that does, it will start putting oil all the way through into these bearings. And I just have to, you have to go slowly because there's a gasket surface here that's getting some oil on it, which we don't really want to have happen, but that's okay. We've got some oil into the galleys, and we'll put a little oil in here, a little oil around the rods, and then what we'll end up doing, just a little oil here, make sure there's some oil on the balancers. This is going to be filled with oil anyway, so it's really not a big deal. Then I'm going to take a little bit of engine assembly lube, and I just want to put some on our main bearings. And this is a very thick lube. And we'll just go on ahead, and I'm going to roll this engine around a little bit. Let me just get some lube on it. We don't want it too thick in there because we're going to have to clean it back off for putting on our sealer, but that's okay. And all that we want to do is just roll it around a little bit in there so it's got oil, and you can see there's plenty of oil in there now. And we'll get this guy lubed up on the other side. So now we've got engine assembly lube on all our bearings. Things are moving nice and nice. So we're in good shape there. So now what we need to do is we need to make sure that our that we're clean where we have this assembly lube, and we don't want that on a gasket surface, so we're just going to take a little acetone and we'll clean that off. And this side doesn't really matter because this is the clutch side. This side here does matter because it has got it's out into atmosphere. And we'll get that clean. Make sure there's no oil whatsoever on any of these surfaces. I'll get this guy cleaned up. Okay, now we are clean again, so we're ready to go. So the first thing you need to do on this one, there's an O-ring that fits in here. It's got a flat side on it and a round side, and the flat side goes to the bottom, and that just makes sure that's nice and clean. Then we're going to use the best stuff for doing cases. There's all sorts of different brands out there. Honda has some, but Bond makes a very, very good gray colored sealer that works beautifully. It is the best out there, and it's a silicone, and you just need to put a real thin coat on all these surfaces. So we're going to go around and get all of this stuff completely coated. Make sure you go around the seals extremely well where they meet. And we're just going to continue working our way around until it is all covered. Make sure that if you see any imperfections in the castings where somebody has scraped it or something of that nature, make sure you go on ahead and you make sure there's sealant in there so that it can't leak. We are in an area here on this side, especially, it's especially important to do so, and around the back, because this is all going out to the outside. And try not to be sloppy about it, but we do a nice job of sealing it all up. We don't overdo it because we don't want sealant crawling in through our engine. So this has just got a nice thin coat going all the way around. And again, this side of the engine is not as critical as the other side, but we get our sealant in there. And just continue on. And now this is important because again this is out to the atmosphere here, and this side all the way out here. Alright, so here we go. We're getting almost all the way around. Again, we have to make sure that these critical sides have all got the sealant nice and evenly pushed around there. Not thick, not so it's going to be squeezing out into your engine, because this stuff is not that bad, but boy, the regular RTV that people use, this engine was full of it. And that is just really, really bad. Okay, and I'm just going to put a small layer around here, and there's this clutch rod seal needs to be sealed up fairly well. Make sure we don't have too much in there. Go around, make sure that we get it a good even coat, make sure we've done it. All surfaces, not overdone, very light, but just enough to cover all of these things, make sure it seals real well. Double checking our work. Yep, we're in good shape here, got a good coat there, and again, let's get this coated up nicely, and we're going to put a little extra right around the seals. Okay, so now we're ready to mate the two halves together. And to do that, I've Loctited these in. The clutch pushrod seal is right here. And so all that we need to do, since everything is lined up, we've got grease on everything, I think what we'll do is we'll put just a small amount of assembly lube onto our bearing, just because. Make sure that it's got lube on it, and we'll get that in there. A little bit of assembly lube on our bearing. And we'll put a small amount of sealant, just a small amount around where our seal goes, so that we make sure it seals up properly. Make sure all of these mating surfaces have got sealant on it. Okay, so now all that we need to do is put our two halves together. All right, we carefully go do that. And everything pops together without any major force. Okay, so the next thing we need to do is properly torque down our engine bolts. So there are 4 bolts that go into here. We have already cleaned up the bolts. They're in good shape. So what we'll do here is we are going to wind these guys down. And we'll gently, just gently slide these in. Okay, and now what they say to do is to take, and there's a bolt here, we just need to wind these in gently. Just hand tight. well, not hand tight, but just snug. And we'll put this one in, put this one in, and all of our bolts are nice and cleaned up so they look nice. This one, yep, that's all good. And we'll wind these guys down using a 10mm. And I'm just snugging them down. There's no torque really going into them. And there's a couple more that go here, I believe. These are real long. And another long one. Okay, so that's all the bolts all the way around. And whoops, oh, one more. Okay, so they're all snugged down. So what they say to do here is we need to torque the main bolts to 11 foot-pounds, and so we've set up our torque wrench to 11 foot-pounds, and there is an order. So this one is the first one, and the next one. And the next one. And the next one. Okay, then they say to go up to 22 foot-pounds. And we'll do that one. Okay. And then they say to torque the smaller bolts to 87 inch-pounds. So I've set up a torque wrench to 87 inch-pounds, and away we go. Okay, so everything is now torqued down on the bottom. We got this to 22 foot-pounds. These are all at 87 inch-pounds. Get them all done. We'll just take a lap and make sure we get them all. And we've got them all. Good. So now we are all torqued down and ready to put the rest of the bolts in the top of the engine, which we'll do. Take this, getting a little heavier. Okay, so we'll finish up with all the rest of the bolts here, put them all in. Long one here, and another short one, and a short one, and there should be one more long one around here. There's a long one right there. Okay, And we'll get these wound in. Okay, those are all in, and we will then torque them down to 87 inch-pounds. One back here that needs to get wound in. There's still some more cleanup we're going to be doing on this engine, but this is getting the bottom end together. It makes it a little easier to clean up these parts. Okay, and get this one torqued. We'll get this guy torqued. And our engine, our bottom end, is bolted together. So now the next thing we'll be doing is we will be working on assembling the rest of the transmission, that clutch, get this all done. Transmission is moving nicely, engine is moving freely. We are in good shape. We'll do our shift shaft and get that all wound in and continue on from there. Oil pump is all done. Everything is relatively clean. We'll get this cleaned up a little bit better before we put on the case, but we're in good shape. So we'll be doing that next. So now we're ready to start assembling the rest of the engine. The first thing we need to do is get the shifter put in. And so to do that, we make sure that everything is all cleaned up. We've cleaned up all our gaskets. Shifter is all ready to go, cleaned up. And all we need to do is slide it in, and it's going to go past the seal back there. I can feel that. And then this goes and gets indexed here, and then we push down on this to get it so that it goes into this. So now the shifter can go in and turn the shifter on. That's really all that it does. And in this bike, they have a little holder right here to make sure the shift drum doesn't come out. Now, a lot of times they'll be against a case or something of that nature, but in this case it's not. So what we're going to do is, in this, we are going to give it a little bit of blue Loctite. We don't want it red and permanent, but we'll put a little blue Loctite into each of these screws, and we'll get them wound in. And once they will stay there properly. Let's get it started. Okay, and then another one, a little more blue Loctite. Not much, just enough. And we'll do the same thing here. Get them started. And we'll just wind them in with this. And this will apply a decent amount of torque, and that's ready to go. So now we're ready to start to put on the clutch. Everything in here is done. There's really not much going on other than those two. Oil pump is there. So now what we're going to do is we're going to assemble a clutch. And this is a relatively simple operation, but it does take a few steps. So in this particular instance, let's get this out here. This guy goes up here, and what's going to happen, there's a chain around this, so we got to get our chain, and we'll put that on. There's no specific timing or anything like that. And then this gear goes here. There's no washers on it or anything. It just held on with a clip, and you get the chain in there, and then you just get this guy kind of lined up and pushed on. So it takes a little bit of, there it is, and it's ready to go. And get your finger out of there. And that is pretty much that part of it. So the next thing you need to do is we're going to put on the clutch hub. There's a washer that goes here. The hub goes on, or the inner pressure plate, and this gets pushed on. It's a little stubborn. And we're not quite engaged yet. There it goes. Just push it on, and there's a small washer that goes there, and then there's just a couple of clips, one clip here and one clip here, and we'll get that. And so the big circlip is going to go on here. No washers, just a circlip. Snap it into place. And it snaps into place. And then the other one for the clutch is here. It's a smaller one. And we snap it into place. And we are good to go with that. So this is all put together. Now, to put the clutch together, this is a relatively simple operation. There's not much going on with it. But the first thing we do need to do is make sure that the clutch plates are within the service limit. And the service limit is 1.9 millimeters, and that's the minimum it can be, but it should be anywhere between 2.5 and 3.2 millimeters. So we just get our... Okay, so to measure these, you zero out your caliper and measure, and 2.5 is our minimum, 3.2, so we're right in the middle at 2.95. Perfect. And you just keep on measuring all of them and make sure. 2.97, we're in good shape. I've already measured these. 2.92, we're well within the spec. And that's just all that you have to do. Now, if your clutch has got this, if you look on the back here and you see that it's got a place for a plate to sit, that means a fiber plate goes in there first. And then there are springs in between the fiber plates and the metal plates. And this spring goes in, and this spring helps disengage the metal plate from the fiber plate, which allows it to engage more smoothly. And we can put a little bit of oil on these guys. As a matter of fact, we're just going to back that out, and we'll put some oil here. The clutch plates do not need to be soaked in oil. Whoever said that is wrong. The manufacturers have never said that. The only time that ever became true is when a certain clutch company didn't their plates didn't work very well. So what they did is they said, oh yeah, you need to make sure that they soak in oil forever, because they wouldn't release properly, and that's just bad news. So every time one of these fiber plates goes in, underneath it you put a spring, and you alternate between the fiber plate and the steel plates. Also on the steel plates, there's a rounded edge and then there's a sharp edge. You want the sharp edge to go out. It's just the way they were assembled at the factory. I don't know if there's any real necessity to it, but that's the way they've always been. And I thought I saw somewhere in one service manual that you're supposed to do that. So always do that. They always come that way. Yamahas, Kawasaki's, Suzuki's, they are always the same way. And we just alternate, rounded edge in, and give it a shot of oil. Another fiber plate, another spring. And the steel plate. Give it a shot of oil. fiber plate, spring, steel plate, another shot of oil, and just a little bit of oil is plenty. The first time it moves, it's fine. Okay, and get down to these last ones, and those springs are kind of holding this thing out, and you can see it just kind of separates the plate. It really does a good job. Okay, and we do the same thing here. Little oil, get our fiber plate in, and we get a spring. Okay, now, and as you see, the clutch spins really nice and free with all that. And now I have to push pretty hard to get those two to lock together, but that's okay. That's what we want. And lastly, we need to make sure that we put this ball bearing in, and then we get the clutch pusher, and we'll give it a drop or two of oil just because. Then you put on the pressure plate. Pressure plate in this case has an alignment mark right here and a dot right here, and you make sure those two go together. If you don't, the pressure plate won't go into these grooves properly, and the clutch will never engage. So just make sure those go on. Put in your spring, and we'll put in a bolt, another spring, and we'll do another bolt. I'm kind of holding the clutch together because all those little springs in between the pressure plates, or the steel plates, are kind of pushing the clutch out. We want to make sure everything's lined up. Okay, now get two more. And there's nothing special about the clutch, other than this engine's a little weird because this engine actually turns backwards because of the chain. Normally these gears are engaged with each other, and so the engine turns forward, this turns backwards, which allows this one to turn forward. This one doesn't do that, so the engine has to turn backwards. This turns backwards so this one can turn forward. Little weird, but that's it. So now we've got the right side of our engine all the way together. It's done. There's nothing more other than putting on the cover, and we'll be doing that next. To put on our side cover, and because we're using an aftermarket gasket, I don't trust it to seal up all that well. So I'm going to take some of this Kawasaki Kawabond liquid gasket, and it's a very, very thin gasket sealer, and we're just going to rub some of this in to both sides of this. This will make sure that we get a good seal all the way around. Kind of messy, but it works pretty well. And we got it all the way around. Pretty good even coverage. Whoops, a little bit more here. Okay, we got a good even coverage. And I like to put a little extra right around where the engine cases come together. And we got this guy all ready to go. Smeared up. Okay, wipe off my hands. And we've got our cover all cleaned up. we've cleaned up all the surfaces on it, and it is now in good shape to go back on. And I just got to make sure your seal doesn't get messed up when we do this. And make sure that here we go. That goes on. And there's make sure this seal is in good shape, which it is. And now it's just ready for some screws. And we've cleaned up all our screws. That's a short one. And that was a longer one. And that one goes here. Now we'll take this one. Okay, so now all that we need to do, we'll run these guys in. Do it as evenly as possible. And this side is done. We'll be doing ignition pieces and stuff, but we'll be doing that in another video. So now, we'll flip the engine around and we'll do the other side. And so, with this side, now that we've moved everything around, turned it around, this side is all cleaned up. But this side is a dry side of the engine, so I'm not going to worry about, we don't need to worry about extra sealer or anything like that. So we just take this, put the gasket on where it belongs. There's some guide pins on it. And now our side cover, which we've polished up and cleaned up, can now go on. And it will, we don't have to worry about sealing this stuff up because again, it's dry in there. And this just needs to get pushed on. There's some magnets. There we go. It goes on, and that's pretty much the end of that. And so, put in our screws. That's a short one. The longer one. Make sure the gasket's pushed into place. And lastly, this one. Okay, and again the same thing. We just run these down. I'm pushing the gasket in a little bit so for looks more than anything. Continue on. Now I can just take this and wind them down in. Okay, so the case is on there. We're going to go on ahead, and we have a couple more screws to put in here. We're going to replace these with something that look a little bit better, but for now we'll just get them in place. A little rusty looking. I just want them tight at the moment. Good. So the bottom end is basically together. We're going to do a little work on the harness here. Get this all taped up properly with cloth tape, not regular electrical tape. This guy plugs into here for our neutral indicator, and there's a little clip that ends up over these wires after we're done. But basically what we have here is the bottom end is put together, and then we can get started on the top end, which means we've got new piston rings going in. We'll get everything all cleaned up in that area. We got some more cleaning to do, but our engine is basically together. The bottom end. Everything looks good at the moment, but there's some more cleanup that has to happen. This is rather dark, and it doesn't look terrible, but it doesn't look good either. So we will be working on that and doing a better job. So as you can see, when we oiled up the bottom of the engine, it was coming out through these oil passages, and that's what we did want to have happen. So that's good. Things are fine at the moment. Everything is sealed up. The engine looks good. It's going to be, again, a little more cleaning here and there to get things to look pretty, but other than that, we're ready to start in on the top end. I'm hoping that the valve guide seals come in. We've got the new rings, but we don't want to put it together until we have all the parts and we can put the head on with it. And the reason for that is because KZ400s leak. They have leaked from the very beginning, and you have to make sure that you go on ahead and make sure every gasket's got sealant on it. And you want to be able to torque everything down. Once those gaskets are ready to go, put them in, and you will be doing yourself a favor. We can't just put the base gasket on because it won't get torqued down properly. So we'll be waiting for those pieces. But other than that, it's basically the bottom end is ready to go. The countershaft sprocket will go on. We'll get that all cleaned up, put together once we get the engine in the frame and everything all ready to go. So we're in good shape. And we have completed the bottom end of our KZ400. Everything is all bolted together on the bottom end. Everything's ready to go. So the next video, we're going to start in on the top end where we'll hone the cylinders. We are going to go on ahead and do some surfacing on some of the nastier surfaces on this. But when we're done, the whole engine will be together, and we will be ready to put it back in the frame. So see you next time. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe.